Nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo.
In his first interview, Pope Leo XIV said claims of a financial crisis at the Vatican had been greatly exaggerated, noting that the Holy See actually recorded a surplus of €60 million in 2024. Pope Leo has also moved quickly to make changes in how the Vatican manages its money. Now he is allowing Vatican departments to use international banks and investment firms to manage their assets. He also ruled that IOR, the Vatican Bank, does not have the authority over all Vatican transactions, stripping it of some of its control. But for decades, the Vatican has struggled with transparency and accountability in its finances. Pope Francis was determined to address this. Among several reforms, he appointed Cardinal George Pell to head the Secretariat for the Economy, and in a groundbreaking step, named the Vatican's first Auditor General, Libero Malone. Milone arrived with an impressive resume, a top financial auditor who spent more than 30 years at Deloitte in Italy and in the USA, as well as at the World Food Programme and other major firms. His mission was to examine the Church's balance sheets and bring order and oversight to the Church's financial operations. But after just 2 years into the job, Libero Malone suddenly resigned, a resignation he says he was forced to make because he had begun uncovering financial irregularities in one of the Vatican's highest offices. He took legal action, alleging that Cardinal Angelo Becciu pressured him to quit after he began finding evidence of major fraud. Since then, the Vatican launched a separate criminal trial against the same Cardinal Angelo Becciu, charging him with embezzlement and fraud involving €350 million of church funds in a failed London property investment. He was found guilty and is now appealing the ruling. In Malone's case, the Vatican dismissed his complaint, arguing that even if Cardinal Becciu did force his resignation, he acted in a personal capacity, not as an official of the Secretariat of State, and therefore the Vatican bore no responsibility. Milone appealed, but the decision was upheld, and now he has launched a final appeal, and he speaks again exclusively to EWTN News and reveals for the first time on camera more of the financial irregularities and issues at the Vatican Bank he and Cardinal Pell uncovered in 2016. €2.5 million sent to a hospital to build a new ward. The money was sent. Is there a new ward at the hospital?
No.
The question comes down to, well, was it a computer glitch and it was incompetent people looking after the finances, or did it go beyond that?
You're asking a question to which is very difficult to answer. I know the answer. It wasn't a glitch.
He explains why, in his view, trust in the Vatican's financial management is essential.
If the Vatican finances are sound, it means that our church will continue. If the Vatican finances are not sound, it's going to have problems.
I'm Colm Flynn, and this is an interview with former Vatican Auditor General Libero Malone. Libero Malone, it's great to see you again. How are you?
Fine, thank you very much. Nice to see you again.
We've just watched a short video recap at the start of this interview showing your story and some of the main points. To recap once again, you took a case against the Vatican for unfair dismissal, reputational damage, loss of earnings. They did not rule in your favour. They said that the Secretary of State was not responsible. If you believe the Cardinal was responsible, you should have taken legal action against him. So you appeal that. Now they've rejected your appeal, saying that your original claim against the Secretary of State was groundless. And on top of that, you must pay all of the legal costs for the initial trial, which is amounting to, is it tens of thousands of euro?
€110,000.
€110,000. How do you feel?
I think that the situation is quite dramatic from my standpoint and my colleague's standpoint, who's died in the meantime. It's quite simple, we were dismissed for reasons we never understood, and I'll explain that in a moment. And we presented a claim as the law foresees. There is a 1933 law which says that any legal claim against the Vatican has to be presented at the Secretary of State or the Governatorato. Since I was working principally for the Secretary of State, since I was working for the Pope, we presented it at the Secretary of State. And that was dismissed because the actions of the people who dismissed me were personal actions, which is rather ridiculous, if I can use that sentence, because they were institutionally acting in their roles. I was summoned by Cardinal Becciu and told the Pope I had no longer faith in me.
And if he was working in a personal capacity, he would not have had the authority to do that.
Exactly. And the fact is that he called the gendarmerie to pick me up and take me to their offices to explain the claims against me. So that was an institutional act. It wasn't a private act or a personal act.
I think it's important to point out that when we first sat down originally around 2 years ago and I interviewed you about your story and you talked about cardinals lining their pockets, money being found in their personal accounts that should have been going to dicasteries, we broadcast the interview, huge reaction and a lot of people watched it, but also we looked for comment from the Vatican and we sent very clearly all the claims that you were making and we didn't get any response. Subsequent to that interview, you and I sat down for BBC Radio, for the BBC World Service, full half-hour robust interview where you reiterated the same claims and you made new claims. Again, the BBC in London contacted the Vatican, put all the claims that you were making to them, looked for a response, no response. And prior to this interview, we reached out to the Vatican again and informed them that this interview was coming up and gave them a chance to respond, and they have not done so. So I just want to put that on the record.
I think they're very embarrassed. They're very embarrassed what two individuals did within the Vatican from an institutional standpoint, and they don't have the answer. So they try to shy away from the issue without commenting on it, which is what happened in the legal case. In both instances, both in the first instance and in the appeal, it was rejected because I shouldn't have acted against the Secretary of State and that the actions were of two private individuals.
They're putting the onus on the individuals, saying, look, it's not the institution's problem. The institution didn't do this, it was the individuals kind of off on the Western frontier doing things their own way. We can't be held responsible.
Yes, but and in this context, may I add one thing? When they delivered the decree of the crimes that I committed, the document said that they had a document number 61, which proved that they had carried out 7 months of investigation on me and included all the details of whatever crimes I'd committed. This happened in June of 2017. 8 years and some months have gone by, and we have asked for this document many, many times, and we've never been given it. So I don't have any element to know what exactly I'm accused of.
You're accused of. So how did you find out that they had this document? You were told?
It was included in the decree which they presented to me, which they used as an excuse to get rid of me.
They said they had an investigation, documentation.
It's written black and white, document 61.
Why do you think you have never seen it or you've never been allowed to see it?
My impression is I've never seen it because maybe it doesn't include anything. Because had it included something real, I would have been confronted with it. Now, since this matter was quite an important element of the whole discussion, I discussed this matter with Cardinal Parolene. You need to know that since my exit from the Vatican, I've met Cardinal Parolene about 16 times to discuss my case. And when in 2020 he realized that we were not able to get a copy of this document, he said he would investigate. He came back to us saying that the reason why we had not received this document was due to the fact that the pontifical secret had been placed upon all the documents regarding my case, which at that time, if you understand, made me laugh because I had committed nothing. I don't see why there should have been a pontifical secret. However, he endeavored to get this document, and at the end of 2021, he told us that he had been able to remove the pontifical secret from this particular document, and that the promoter of justice would call upon me to discuss this document. The promoter of justice did call on me in May of 2022, so 5 months later, and when we went to see him, myself and my colleague Ferruccio Panico.
Thinking you were getting the document?
thinking that we would see the document, he said he didn't have it. And he didn't know where it was. And he raised some other issues regarding documents which had been confiscated at the time of the raid, and tried to contest our activities, and I informed him that what he was telling me was audit work, nothing else.
Before I want to ask you about Cardinal Parolene. You just mentioned you've met him 16 times, but I know that when you appealed the case, you say that as part of your appeal, you had your documentation, of course, that you had to submit to the Vatican court, but they told you that you would only get a full hearing if you removed a certain 20 plus pages.
Oh yes, the final appeal hearing was on the end of June of this year, but in November 2024 we received an order from the Vatican court, they call it an ordinanza, which said the proceedings can only proceed if you remove all the following pages from your document. And those pages covered all the elements we had included to demonstrate that all the work we had done in the 2 years we were there was audit work.
Audit work.
And we had listed the issues with the examples of what we're doing, because I thought it was important to prove that all I did in 2 years was respect the statute which I'd been given and do audit work according to international auditing standards, which was required. And they asked us to remove it because it was offensive, what they called, for the higher management of the Vatican.
Is that your interpretation, or is that what they said?
No, this is what they said specifically.
Offensive to management?
They said that it was offensive for the posizione apicali of the Vatican, which means apicali is the highest level, the senior people in the various dicasteries.
And in these 20 pages, you outlined some of the things perhaps you and I spoke about before.
We didn't go into detail. We illustrated, without too much detail, the kind of issues that we'd come across which were audit related. And all the matters that were included in those 20 pages have been reported to the Pope. Because I was asked to report to the Pope on a regular basis. And the Pope, until March of 2016, so in the first year I was there, once a month received me, and he wanted to know what I was doing and what solutions there were to the problems that were being raised and how he should help to proceed. Until after that date, I was never given the chance to speak to the Pope anymore.
You mentioned Pietro Parolene. He is the second in command.
Yes.
He is the Secretary of State of Vatican City, of the Holy See. He is just second from the Pope. During Pope Francis's pontificate, after your dismissal, you still had a good relationship with him. You were able to meet him, as you say, 16 times. What was the blockage between you trying to get your message through to the Pope? You're meeting the second in command, you're showing him all the evidence, you're telling him your case.
I don't know, I can't answer that question. He was available, we discussed the issues. You need to know that before I left, when I reported to the Pope had instructed me to report to Cardinal Parolene at the same time. So every month after meeting the Pope, I would report the same things to Cardinal Parolene, since he was number 2 and able to execute certain activities. So he knew exactly the things that I'd come across, because he'd been told. When I met him after my exit, he tried to help and find a solution. He did find a solution partially to document 61, because he told us that
he told you that it existed.
But official secret had been removed, but then we never saw the document. So it was a sort of a half solution, if you see what I mean. You know, it never. And I went back to him and said, "Look, you know, you told me that we would see the document, and it's nowhere to be seen." He said, "Well, that's very strange. You know, I don't know if he was hesitant in trying to resolve the issue, or otherwise. I have never understood it."
But what was his reaction when you would meet him? He was sympathetic? He was surprised?
He was always very sympathetic.
Yeah.
He's a very good diplomat.
Do you think maybe in some way, because you were starting to talk in the media, it was a case of meeting you just to keep you at bay and to keep the issue?
It could be, maybe. But I remember that the first time I spoke to the media in September 2017, when I was dismissed, I spoke to the media because I was getting a lot of pressure, enormous pressure, from journalists asking me, why did you resign? Why did you resign? It got to the point that there was only one way of resolving it, talking to them.
Tell me, remind us, APSA, what is APSA?
APSA is the major dicastery of the Vatican responsible for the management of its assets of the Vatican. It's like a treasury, and it's also a sort of a banking institution, although it's not a direct bank because it operates through banks in other countries to operate its financial activities, but it operates as if it were a bank for the Vatican.
It oversees all of the finances of the Vatican, an umbrella over all the dicasteries?
It deals with most of the finances of the Vatican.
This year, at the end of July, you had a meeting with journalists and you brought up some matters regarding APSA and money laundering.
Sometime early July, a journalist had carried out a research, investigated an issue regarding payment systems for APSA. When this journalist did his investigation and came up with an analysis at the beginning of July, he contacted me and he said he had found out that the payment system in APSA was possibly able to make payments by losing track of the receiver. And he said, is this true? And I said, and he had a copy of a letter that Cardinal Pell had sent to me at that time in 2016, asking me to investigate the matter. And the letter specifically says that this is what he'd found, and because of my role as Auditor General, he wanted me to investigate this matter, which I did.
Cardinal Pell had found this?
Yes, and I did. So I told the journalist, what you found out is correct, full stop. So I only mentioned it once, saying there was a problem with the SWIFT payment issues, and I confirmed the investigation. How could I not confirm? I couldn't lie.
And SWIFT payments, the international standard for electronic transfers from one bank account to another, or international transfers, you send it from one IBAN-linked bank account, you have the IBAN of another, a unique code of another bank account, and you could send it. But what was the issue here?
Well, that there was a change in the IBAN in the system.
That someone could make a money transfer and then change the direction where the money was going.
Exactly.
After it had left the account. So
exactly.
Change the IBAN afterwards so it wouldn't show up on the initial records.
Exactly.
So it lands somewhere else.
Exactly. You could be an accountant. Maybe that's your new
another
job.
calling, yeah, if this packs in. But
it was in 2016,
yeah,
right? And they claimed that in 2020, 2024 it wasn't happening. Well, maybe they're right, but maybe they should have thanked Cardinal Pell and Mr. Milone for having found the issue in 2016. It was rectified.
Because a cardinal of the church who was put by Pope Francis in charge of overseeing the finances and cleaning up the finances.
As oversight of all financial matters.
So he'd come from the highest level. They used to say he was the third from the top at some point, Cardinal George Pell, the late Cardinal George Pell. But you see, this is then the question comes down to, well, was it a computer glitch and it was incompetent people looking after the finances and they were just making a mess of things, or did it go beyond that into criminal and fraudulent activity?
You're asking a question to which is very difficult to answer. I know the answer, but it wasn't a glitch. We found specific instructions as to how this system could be used. And you mentioned were there criminal proceedings? You need to know something else, that in my 2 years in the Vatican, I reported 15 issues to the Money Laundering Authority, AIF, and to the Promoter of Justice to investigate, because my statute said if there are issues which conflict with the law, you have to report to these authorities. You need to know that AIF 14 times replied to me that we had misunderstood, and one time they didn't reply, and the Promoter of Justice never replied to any of them. So what's the point in highlighting issues which need to be investigated if nobody looks into them?
Mm. Another thing you mentioned when you met journalists earlier this year, and how you described it, an quote, odd transfer, 2.5 million euros sent to a hospital to build a new ward. The money was sent. Is there a new ward at the hospital?
No. No, this was a transaction with Ospedale Pediatrico Bambini Gesù, and the head at the time, in 2016, had come across a contract which foresaw the building of a new ward, and a private donator was giving 2.5 million, but the director of the hospital said, you know, we don't have any new wards, we don't have any plans for any new wards, you know, can you please investigate this documentation, which was within the context of the role I played, and we examined all the documentation, all the transactions, and we found that 2.5 million had been paid over to Bambini Gesù.
To the hospital? To the hospital,
over a period of time, in equal tranches, 10 tranches of 250,000, I think. And it had gone into the bank account. The ward had not been built, but the money also left the bank account.
The money had left the bank account of the hospital?
Yes.
So it passed through the hospital?
It was at that time managed by other people, not by the person who asked me to investigate. And that was reported to the promoter of justice.
In the Vatican?
In the Vatican.
But something like this, you would think alarm bells would be ringing everywhere. These are not small sums. And if, as you say, the paperwork is there, you say, there's the money leaving the Vatican account. There's the money coming in.
I would have said the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, I just did my job.
Yes.
You know, my job was to review, report, and then get on with the next thing. My job was not of a judicial nature. You know, my job was to do auditing work according to international standards, which is what we did.
Pope Leo XIV, he recently conducted his first interview with the outlet Crux. He spoke about a range of things, but one of them was the Vatican finances. And he said, and I quote, he felt that the claims of a financial crisis at the Vatican were much exaggerated. He said the Vatican actually recorded a surplus in 2024 of 60 million euros. In fact, he said, quote, he wasn't losing any sleep over the issue of finances at the Vatican. So the Pope, who you would think has access to all the information, everything at his disposal, thinks there's no issues with the Vatican finances.
I also said in my interview in July, I was very worried that the Pope would not be properly informed of the situation in the Vatican, because there were too many, let me use the word, skeletons in cupboards that needed to be preserved. And therefore it would be very difficult to understand the issues at hand. Now, the issue of the statement made by Pope Leo concerning the 60 million wasn't the 60 million profit made by the Vatican, but was 60 million profit made by APSA, which is the entity with major activities, etc. But the plan and the project that Cardinal Pell was managing was not just the financial statements of each entity according to international accounting standards. It was the consolidated financial statements of all the entities of the Vatican, which is what it would have been, because they interact between each other. And therefore, when you have different entities within a group of companies, say a listed company, you prepare consolidated financial statements because you remove internal profits, because internal profits are paper profits, not real profits. They don't, let me say it in a simple way, it doesn't become cash in a bank, okay? Now, if you talk to me about APSA having 60 million, I think, and make the faithful in the world believe that the Vatican is pursuing a profitable route, I think it's misleading, because the real financial statements are the consolidated financial statements. Now, why are those not disclosed? Because maybe there's a loss. And that is a critical situation. So I understand that Pope Leo's concern is that the financial situation may be better than he expected. I don't know what's happened between 2017 when I left and today, except from reading in the newspapers. But I also know, as an experienced accountant, that some of the issues that are there would have been very difficult to remove in a very short period of time. Now, the fact that the consolidated financial statements are not being disclosed, to me, is an indication that there is a problem. We need to be sure, and I say this as a Catholic, as an accountant, that we are informed correctly about the state of the Vatican finances. Because if the Vatican finances are sound, it means that our church will continue. if the Vatican finances are not sound, it's going to have problems.
And people need to have confidence.
And
in
people
where
need
they're
to have
putting
confidence.
their money. And when you were appointed the first Auditor General in 2015, this was headline news around the world, and it was seen as a groundbreaking decision by Pope Francis to bring someone in from the outside to audit the Vatican accounts for the first time in history.
What my responsibility is still today is that as the first Auditor General, I need to be honest with the faithful around the world and say, I'm not sure that the system is now working soundly. It needs to be continually worked and analysed properly, and if we are disclosing financial statements, we must disclose the correct financial statements. And the correct financial statements which give a value, and if you like, an asset value and an economical value to the Vatican are the consolidated statements, not the statements of APSA.
After you left, you tried for almost a decade to meet Pope Francis through Cardinal Parolene, through outreach in the media, writing letters, going through cardinals. Am I correct in saying he never met you after?
No, I never, not only met me, I never got a response from any of the letters.
Have you tried to meet Pope Leo?
I said at the end of July that I would like to meet with him. And in fact, a few weeks ago, I sent him a letter asking to be able to meet him in a reserved manner, because I felt it was important to speak eye to eye to resolve my outstanding issue, but also to give him my understanding of some of the challenges that the Vatican faces in moving forward and becoming sound from an economical standpoint.
Have you worked since leaving the Vatican?
No, I had a small engagement which takes up 15 days a year for me, and that's all because I'm on a blacklist. Somebody who apparently is a spy, and the Vatican has never remedied that news, that it's very difficult for me to be placed, which means that I've been damaged financially very significantly now for 8 years. But this is why I'm not giving up on the legal case, and we have presented a new appeal at the highest court in the Vatican, the Court of Cassation, and I hope that it will be heard quickly. There is a saying in the Vatican that biblical times for things to be done. After 8 years of waiting, I think that it's about time that my case be solved.
You've been going through with this case, your initial case, rejected, the appeal, rejected, now you're lodging a new appeal. It's taking time, effort, resources on your behalf. It would stress anybody out to go through this. Many people feel that you're not going to get justice in the end, going through the Vatican court. Will the Vatican convict their own? That theory, what do you say?
I'm an optimistic person. I believe that in any case, if there's a justice system, the justice system has to be properly followed. And I believe that at the end of the day, if there's truth in the documents and the documents are read properly and understood properly, I will be on the right side of the decision. But if they continue removing documents and removing the elements of proof that I'm presenting, how am I ever going to be able to prove that I was right? You see, not only did they remove the documents, they also prohibited me from presenting witnesses.
If this next appeal is rejected, is that the end of the line, or what happens then?
That would be technically the end of the line in the Vatican, yes.
Vatican being its own state?
Being an independent state.
Could it be brought in another jurisdiction, or is that out of the question?
I don't know. I've asked my lawyers to investigate that, but we don't have the answer. It's not very easy, because normally a crime committed within a state, like any state, is pursued within that state and not by another state. So it's not that easy. Although the Vatican
does have some bilateral agreements with Italy.
Yes, there are some bilateral agreements which need to be properly explored, but I don't know what the solution is. I could have gone to the European Court of Justice, but the Vatican is not a member of the European Court of Justice. It's an attendee, I think, but has never undersigned the document. Therefore, I'm precluded from using that route, which is very strange. I would have thought that the Vatican would have been the first member of the European Court of Justice, but never mind.
Would you go back and work at the Vatican again?
Well, first I have to solve my issue of my case, first of all. As I said, I think to you in the past, I committed myself to undertaking this engagement in 2015 with the hope of addressing the stringent issues the Vatican had in its finances. And I think it still has. And I think having had the recognition I had, as you mentioned, in the world press, maybe I'm committed to pursuing this, but it's not my decision. It's, if anybody, it's Pope Leo's decision who he wants to surround himself with, his team to go forward and sort out the finances of the Vatican. I have not only the experience of having worked there for 2 years and having understood some of the difficulties, but also having had the opportunity to work with the late Cardinal Pell, who knew what the issues were, and we worked very well together. And so I also bring, now that he's no longer with us, his knowledge and his experience to the table in trying to address the issues concerning the financial situation of the Vatican.
When you were working as the Auditor General at the Vatican, you were working alongside Cardinal George Pell, and you had, of course, your business partner with you. Your business partner has since passed away. We know that Cardinal George Pell has since passed away. Big newspaper in Australia called The Australian, they had quoted you at the time after Cardinal Pell's death, saying that you believed it was shrouded in mystery. What did you mean by that?
Well, Cardinal Pell was in very good health. I saw him regularly before he died, and he had this hip operation, which is today considered to be very routine. Yet he died for reasons I never understood. And there were newspaper stories afterwards. After I made a claim that it was very strange because I'd been speaking to him till 2 weeks before he died. He was fine. He'd completely recovered from his ordeal in Australia, having been in prison for over 400 days. Then when I made this statement, I heard from Australia that there were issues about the way his coffin was delivered in Australia, which I have no element to prove, but it concerned me. But my concern was that it was strange that he would have died from a hip operation, which is considered to be fairly ordinary these days.
He died coming off the anesthesia, is what was said.
Yes.
You say shrouded in mystery, and I have to be careful knowing that, things can be interpreted in different ways, and again, we don't have the facts, but just when you say that, many people see everything you say as having a lot of weight attached because people believe that you think thoroughly through what you say, and
all I know was that he came out of the operation at midday and he died at 9 o'clock in the evening, which is a long time after coming out of the anesthesia.
Sticking with Cardinal Pell for a moment before we wrap this up, and I think it's something that you and I spoke about before, but the charges that were brought against him in Australia, that he ultimately had to leave his job overseeing the finances at the Vatican, working with you and trying to clean things up. He had to go back to Australia, face the trial, then go to prison for a year. There's been some speculation and talk that somehow, in some way, the work that he was doing at the Vatican, trying to stamp out corruption and overhaul the finances, was connected then with the accusations that were made against him, which a high court in Australia, 7 high court judges, ultimately, unanimously overturned in the end. What do you think of that theory?
Well, first you need to know that my case developed on June the 19th, 2017, and he received his papers to go back to Australia on June the 29th. So 10 days later, very close. And I always thought that the two things were interconnected.
So you were out
on the 19th,
and then Pell
on the 29th.
Was out on the 29th.
I've always thought that we were associated to be gotten rid of because we had created too many problems in undercovering real problems. You need to remember one thing, that we had raised issues about financial problems and accounting issues and in the Vatican, and we were not able to get to grips with some of them. There were some outstanding points. Yet, just 2 years later, there was a big explosion.
Yes. And
so maybe we were right.
And that case, you know, as we're talking about your case, there is a parallel case happening in the Vatican just next door to where we're sitting now. What they're dubbing the Vatican trial of the century. Cardinal Angelo Becciu accused of embezzlement and fraud to the tune of hundreds of millions of euro for the investment in that London property that went south and has cost the Vatican dearly. So that broke after you had left Cardinal George.
We felt we had stumbled over something that we shouldn't have stumbled over. We always had the feeling there was something strange. We couldn't get to grip with it. You know.
But you said in the past you were getting closer.
Cardinal Pell and I were getting closer to the issue. We'd understood there was something, but we didn't really know what it was. But there were certain signs that made us think that we needed to be very careful in looking at some transactions.
And just wrapping up this part of the conversation, when we were on the BBC, we spoke about this. There were claims, and you would know, you were there looking at the figures, that a sum of money left a Vatican department, landed in Australia. I know that some of the Australian bishops have confirmed that this money landed in Australia, but has never been accounted for around the time of Cardinal George Pell being accused and having to go and face that.
Well, it still hasn't been accounted for, but
do you think that's true, that the sum of money did leave and go to Australia?
Well, that's what we understand. It was even in the trial of the century you just mentioned, it was mentioned that money had been sent to Australia. But there was never any possibility of, I understand, of tracing it.
How could that be in this day and age?
Well, there were certain transactions carried out by the Vatican using trusts. And if you use trusts for certain transactions, you can lose the possibility of tracing the movement of funds. So that's all I can say at the moment.
How are you feeling today, Libero, going through all of this? And, you know, Pope Francis has passed away, and now we have Pope Leo XIV. He will have his own priorities and a long list of things that he has to get his mind around facing into his pontificate. Your case is still ongoing. You're going for your last appeal in the Vatican.
I feel very frustrated because as an honest person, I believe I did what my duty was. I know what it was. I always respected the ethics of my profession. I think that part of the story was withheld from the Pope Francis, and that he was misinformed.
Which is why he never wanted to meet you?
Yes, because he didn't know what to say. And I quite understand that. I hope that there's a possibility of speaking to Pope Leo to explain to him that we just did what we were asked to do, nothing else and nothing more. Maybe I was chosen for that in the first place. When they went through the whole system of choosing an Auditor General, I know they interviewed many people, and I know
at the time the paper said you were chosen and picked because of your experience at the United Nations, at Fiat, at Deloitte.
Yes, I was in Deloitte for 32 years. So I think I still have a very good curriculum. I've never moved away from it, deviated from it in any way.
With a clean track record as well.
Very clean track record. There's nothing ever happened in very complex situations. You can imagine in international dealings with international companies worldwide. So I hope that Pope Leo will have time to speak to me privately, so I can explain. I would like to put this in the past and start to work again. You know, I'm not that young, but I feel very young, and I would like to continue working. And the opportunity in the Vatican was to contribute from a social standpoint. You know, I've had a very good career. I can't deny that, and maybe this was an opportunity to give something back to the world I believe in, my religion, my church.
Libero Malone, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your time in interviewing me.